actions to curb aggressive tax avoidance schemes in the light of the Paradise Papers revelations.
Mr. Speaker, this government has taken decisive action to tackle tax avoidance and evasion and to improve the standards of international tax transparency. The UK has secured an additional £160 billion in compliance revenue since 2010, far more than was achieved under the last Labour government. Under this government, the UK now has one of the lowest tax gaps in the world. We have provided HMRC with tough new powers, and in 2015, HMR received £800 million in additional funding to go on tackling tax avoidance and evasion. Mr. Speaker, turning to recent events. Yesterday evening, several international news organisations, led by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, reported on an information leak regarding the financial affairs of a large number of individuals. Mr. Speaker, I should remind the House at this stage that ministers do not intervene in the tax affairs of individuals or businesses, as to do so would be a breach of taxpayer confidentiality. However, I can inform the House that on the 25th of October, HMRC requested that the ICIJ, The Guardian and the BBC share the leaked data so that this information can be compared with the vast amounts of data HMRC already holds due to the initiatives that this government has undertaken. They have yet to respond to this request. Nevertheless, since this data was retrieved in 2016, this government has implemented international agreements that have changed the game for those seeking to avoid and evade their taxes. HMRC are already benefiting from the automatic exchange of financial account information through the Common Reporting Standard, an initiative in which the UK has led the world with over 100 jurisdictions signed up. The Crown dependencies and overseas territories are among those signed up to this initiative and have been exchanging information with HMRC for over a year. And the Crown dependencies and overseas territories have also committed to holding central registers of beneficial ownership information which the UK authorities are able to access. It is important to note, and I quote the ICIJ's disclaimer here, there are legitimate uses for offshore trusts and companies. The ICIJ do not intend to suggest or imply that any people, companies or other entities included in the ICIJ offshore leaks database have broken the law or otherwise acted improperly. So, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the generalised aspersions made by the opposition, the use of offshore accounts or trusts do not automatically mean dishonesty. But this House should be assured that under this government, the HMRC will continue to bear down with vigour on any tax avoidance or evasion activity wherever it may be found.
John McDonnell.
Unless there's a critically overriding reason for the Chancellor not to be here, I believe the House will consider it unacceptable that he is not here to address the biggest tax scandal of this generation. The Minister's response today was the same bluster. He quotes a figure of additional tax revenues which cannot be verified from any publicly available data. He refers to a tax gap which doesn't include the likes of Apple, Facebook, Google and others. He boasts of his government's efforts to address avoidance, yet last week they voted to protect non-DOMs in the finance bill. And last month, the European Parliament accused this government of obstructing the fight against tax avoidance, evasion and even money laundering. Doesn't he appreciate the outrage in our community at this tax dodging? Every pound in tax avoided is a pound taken away from our NHS, our children's education and care for the elderly and disabled. Given the chairman of the Conservative Party and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is responsible for, and I quote, administering the estates and rents of the Duchy of Lancaster, has the Chancellor or any minister discussed these revelations with the Right Honourable Member for Derbyshire Dales, and will he be apologising to Her Majesty for the embarrassment this episode has caused us? With regards to Lord Ashcroft, a major funder of the Conservative Party, who contributed to report £500,000 to the Conservatives in the general election campaign, Can the Minister tell the House what information he has had about the domicile status of Lord Ashcroft between 2010 and 2015 and whether he was paying taxes on his overseas wealth? The Chancellor now has an immediate opportunity to tackle tax avoidance. Can he assure the House that in the forthcoming budget he will adopt Labour's proposals to remove exemptions from non-DOMs and secure full transparency of trusts? Will he now also agree to Labour's proposals to establish an independent public inquiry into tax avoidance? Because I tell them, if this government refuses to act, this next Labour government will.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises the issue of the veracity or otherwise of our figures. £160 billion collected through clamping down on avoidance, evasion and non-compliance. That is a figure that he will find broken down and indeed published in the HMT's annual report and accounts. He refers to Lord Ashcroft, and I'm clearly not going to, as I said in my opening remarks, Mr. Speaker, start getting into the individual tax affairs of any particular individual, regardless of their political allegiance or whoever they may be. But he raises the issue of non-DOM status and non-DOMs, and he raises the issue of the measures that he and his party put forward in the last finance bill. Can I just remind him of two things? It is this party that has put an end to permanent non-DOM status. And it was the party opposite that sought, by voting against that bill at third reading, to stop that from happening.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be an extraordinary misunderstanding by the Shadow Chancellor between avoidance and evasion. Evasion is wholly illegal. Avoidance is normal. People who put their money into an ISA are avoiding tax. That is completely legal. What there is a moral issue, sir. And if you happen to be a political party that spends £1 million a year on rent in a tax-exempt company, that is what people are upset about. It's not avoidance, it's morally wrong avoidance. And isn't that what your party, sir, does?
Yeah.
My party doesn't do anything. As people know, I don't have a party. I'm just the leader of the Good Order and Fair Play Party, or I try to be. Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question, which I take to be directed to myself, Mr. Speaker. And it is, of course, for the Labour Party to account for any situation in which their headquarters may or may not be owned by an overseas trust.
Mr. Stuart Hosey.
It may well be that sheltering from the tax authorities here sums of money greater than the GDP of many countries is not illegal. But I would ask the Minister to agree with me that is precisely the problem. I would also ask him to agree that the Paradise Papers revelations and the massive sums involved now offer no hiding place for those who would deny a public register of beneficial ownership of funds and trusts as well as businesses. This tax avoidance is a driver of global inequality which runs to the very top of business, politics, entertainment and the establishment in many countries. But these papers also shine a light on the hidden ownership of large corporations by foreign state institutions and individuals. So I hope the Minister will agree with me finally that to allow the public, customers and small investors to know who is really behind the most trusted of brands, the Government now throw their weight not simply behind local but global transparency of the beneficial ownership of businesses through offshore trusts, funds and other opaque devices.
Well, the honourable member will know that this government has been at the forefront of clamping down on international tax avoidance and evasion and non-compliance through the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting project that we've been in the vanguard of, through the work on common reporting standards that we have also been introducing amongst our Crown dependencies and overseas territories. So he will find that we are no slouches on this side of the House when it comes to grappling with the items that he raises.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could my right honourable friend confirm that this country is now leading the world on tackling tax avoidance, and how does the action of consecutive Conservative Chancellors compare with the non-action from consecutive Labour Chancellors?
Well, as my right honourable friend will know, Mr. Speaker, one of the measures of how on top or otherwise the country is of its tax affairs is the tax gap. This is at a historic low in this country at just 6%. Under the last Labour government in 2005 it was at 8%, and if we had the level of tax gap today that we had under Labour, we would be £11.8 billion short of tax, enough to employ every police man and woman in England and Wales.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The real problem with all the action that has been taken so far is that it hasn't got to the heart of the problem, and that is that we need to have openness and transparency about who owns what company where, who owns what trust. And there is a very simple action that the government could take without any legislation, which would immediately slice through a lot of the problems that we've seen in the Paradise Papers, in the Panama Papers, in the Falciani leaks and in the Luxembourg leaks. Why will the government not insist that our overseas territories, that our tax havens have to have public registers of beneficial ownership? Why will they not do that now?
Well, as the honourable lady will know, there are many good reasons why, for perfectly honest and decent reasons, individuals use trust. But she will also know that we have made a great deal of progress on the common reporting standards across 100 different countries, including those to whom she alludes, and that we are also bringing forward the registers of beneficial ownership across those particular jurisdictions, so that our HMRC has the information that it requires.
Nigel Mills.
I wonder if the Minister could use this latest leak as a spur to bring forward the publication of certain issues we've been waiting for a while. The anti-corruption strategy was promised for last December and got lost when the then champion stood down at the election. And we're still waiting to know if we have a register of the public ownership of properties owned here by overseas companies. Can we get those now moving forward so we can give people the confidence that our own regime is robust?
Well, the honourable member, my honourable friend, will know that there are several areas that we are currently examining, but he will also know that in June of this year, very recently, we brought in the money laundering regulations to make sure that banks and lawyers and accountants are properly focused in real time on ensuring that corrupt practices are established and borne down on as appropriate.
Is not the Minister worried about the tangled web of Russian money that appears to be involved at very high levels, as shown by these leaks? And will he not agree that there's now a great public interest in having transparency of ownership and getting these registers published as soon as possible? Why doesn't the government just make an announcement that the overseas territories are going to do that and get on with it?
Hear, hear. I've already explained to the House and the Right Honourable Lady that the Register of Beneficial ownership is now an element within these tax jurisdictions and accessible by HMRC, who, after all, are the authority that we rely upon to bear down on tax avoidance. As to her comments about Russian money, I've no doubt that if HMRC is able to get the information which it has requested from the BBC, The Guardian and the group of journalists, then they will be even better prepared to clamp down on those issues where they are found to be inappropriate.
James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In looking at these issues of the overseas territories and crown dependencies, can I urge the Minister to bear in mind states in the US that have worse standards than some of those crown dependencies and overseas territories, and standards need to be raised globally, not just in some of these island paradise states?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we do need to work internationally with our international partners, which is why, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we have been working closely with the OECD on the base erosion and profit shifting project, in which we are well ahead of the pack in terms of implementing those recommendations.
Sir Vincent Cable.
What sanctions has the government taken or proposed to take
in respect of those British overseas territories that pursue tax policies that are damaging to Britain?
As the Right Honourable Member will know, we are currently engaged in a variety of discussions with our international partners, not least with the European Union in terms of the so-called blacklist, and we are looking closely at the concerns that they and others have in order to strike an appropriate balance between protecting what are very important services to those particular jurisdictions and making sure that tax is paid fairly and as it should be.
Hugh Merriman.
Speaker, would the Minister consider it's not just a question of countries such as the Cayman, Bermuda, those territories, but also indeed in the European Union, the Republic of Ireland and the Netherlands are regarded as jurisdictions where there may be tax advantages to be set up. So would he agree with me that rather than singling out those jurisdictions, we should just recognise that in a global environment where capital is free, the importance is actually the UK tax structure on wealth, and that's something this government has definitely got right?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point, which, put simply, is that, of course, it is not just the tax rate in the particular regime that is pertinent in terms of the issues that we're discussing today. And as he said, he mentioned the Republic of Ireland, where the rate is just 12.5%. But it is those other factors that we need to be looking at in order to come to those judgments.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How many more panorama programmes and leaks should we expect until we see full and proper action on tax avoidance and tax evasion in this country? And as a starter for 10, can I suggest to the Minister that they reinstate the thousands of tax officer posts that they've cut in Liverpool and right across the country?
This government, as the Honourable Lady will know, has brought in £160 billion in tax avoidance since 2010. It's brought in £2.8 billion of that was in respect of individuals attempting to hide funds overseas. She raises the issue of HMRC, which is going through a construction reassignments at the moment, and that is quite right. That is quite right and proper, so that we have a series of hubs that have a critical mass of individuals present within them, that has the right technology, the right infrastructure, in order, on a risk basis, to go after those who are avoiding taxation.
Ellen Whately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the lead the government is taking internationally in tackling tax avoidance, because clearly this isn't a problem we can solve on our own in isolation. Could my right honourable friend advise what the government is doing to use transparency to make sure individuals, trusts and companies pay their fair share to the Treasury?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question, and of course, as I have pointed out a few times now, we are looking at the current implementation of the current reporting standards. We are also looking at various recommendations coming out of the BEPS regime, some of which in fact were present within the finance bill, to stop flagrant tax avoidance, sometimes on the part of some of the largest corporations in the country. And of course, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, that was a bill that the party opposite sought to kill at its third reading.
When I asked officials at the Department for Trade whether tax transparency was required in our trade treaties, they said that this was a novel idea and certainly not something that was included in the text for TTIP. Yet it's exactly this kind of secrecy that lets the rich hide billions while the people pay. Will the Minister ensure that in the trade treaties presented to this House in the future, we demand and insist on tax transparency in every single one?
As the right honourable gentleman will know, we are committed to country-by-country reporting. We are going to push forward on a multilateral basis with that. As to our future trade treaties, they are for the future and for the Department for Trade.
Low rates of tax and growing tax revenues depend critically on every penny of tax due being paid. So what is the position if someone receives a fee, then sends it to a trust fund in Mauritius, only then to receive that money back as a loan?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on a specific tax structure put to me in these questions, other than to say that if it falls foul of our very rigorous disguised remuneration arrangements, some of which were put through in the latest finance bill, then clearly that would be an area where those people involved would expect to receive a hand on the shoulder from HMRC.
Dennis Skinner.
Doesn't the publication of these papers show us that this government is more concerned about hounding those disabled people applying for PIP and ESA and taking them disabled motors away from them than they are concentrating on the real people that are dodging paying tax, as revealed in these papers, people that are close to the Conservative Party. Sort it out.
Well, I'm afraid the honourable member overlooks a simple fact, that when it comes to paying tax in this country, we have one of the most progressive tax systems in the world, with the wealthiest 1% of income tax payers paying no less than 28% of all income tax. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, £2.8 billion has been raised from the wealthy who may have been trying to avoid paying their tax going forward, a far stronger record than for the party opposite.
Andrew Bridgen.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that by far the biggest threat to UK tax revenues is the run on the pound and the flight of capital predicted by the party opposite themselves should they ever get into government?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. One of the measures that a future Labour government have said they will take will be to stick up the corporation tax rate to 26%, which will do absolutely nothing to create jobs, nothing to create wealth, nothing to improve our economy, and most of all, nothing to raise the vital taxes that we need to support our vital public services.
Caroline Lucas.
What the Paradise Papers reveal about the industrial scale of tax dodging, together with the shaming fact that some of the UK's overseas territories and Crown dependencies are the largest tax havens and secrecy jurisdictions in the world, will the government now drop its morally indefensible blocking of the development of a credible and meaningful EU blacklist of tax havens?
Well, the honourable lady is, I'm afraid, simply wrong, because the discussions are ongoing at the European Union at the moment on the issue of the blacklist. The United Kingdom government has done absolutely nothing to attempt to block those discussions. We are firmly and deeply engaged within them, and we expect them to conclude by the end of this year.
Mr. Speaker, in a world of increasingly global businesses, it is the reality, whether the party opposite like it or not, that we have to tackle this on a global scale. Isn't that why it's right that David Cameron used the G7 as a crucial method to tackle this, and why it's right that we continue to take an international approach?
But my honourable friend is absolutely right. We seek to move forward on the basis of unity with our overseas partners, and that is why we have played such a full role with the OECD.
Mr. David Lammy.
Like me, 2/3 of British taxpayers are taxed at source. They're PAYE. They just can't understand why anyone would want to put money into a small island like Bermuda, the Cayman Islands or Jersey. The Minister says there are legitimate reasons. Will he educate me? What are the legitimate reasons?
Well, as the right honourable member knows, there are many reasons why individuals use trusts, and it may be that I decide I want to trust for my children, and I may decide that I don't want that to be known publicly, exactly the way in which that trust is going to operate for reasons.
Dennis Skinner.
Doesn't the publication of these papers show us that this government is more concerned about hounding those disabled people applying for PIP and ESA and taking them disabled motors away from them than they are concentrating on the real people that are dodging paying tax, as revealed in these papers, people that are close to the Conservative Party. Sort it out.